the prison guards, or whatever they're supposed to be called, were, at first, they acted like they wanted to make you feel small and bad, but they didn't convince me. Maybe I'm short, but right after I got there, there was a paper that came around that mentioned that I was a felon. Well, I was not a felon. That was a misdemeanor that I was sentenced on. And so I went up to one of the guards and I said, I'm not a felon. Anyone in a federal prison is a felon. So I went to my pro bono attorney by telephone and told him, and so in just a few days, the correction came through that said that I was a misdemeanor, not a felon. And I didn't run up to him and say, ha, ha, ha. But the next time he saw me, he said, well, I had no way of knowing you weren't a felon. What do you do here anyway? Well, Pekin is a working prison. And I said, well, I work in the dining room. What do you do there? And I said, well, I clear off the tables and sweep the floor. Well, that's not much. And I said, I know it isn't. That's why I volunteered to swat the flies. And my friends began calling me the swatter. Well, this same guard came up to the prison shortly after that, and I was born during Depression, and I learned that you don't throw away things that are good just because you want to throw them away. And so when there were napkins on a table that had not been used, I would pick them up and put them on a shelf so that anyone coming in, and they use this dining area as a walk-through quite often, and they could pick the napkins up off the shelf rather than going, because Kleenex was not around. And he came up and he saw them and he said, get those napkins off the shelf. And just as he said that, I had my fly swatter and I swatted a fly. And I said, those aren't napkins. Those are caskets for my flies. And I picked one up and picked up the fly and dropped it in the wastebasket. And there were lots of things like that happened. I don't know. When I went back the second time, there were several things that happened. Well, in the first place, I was 81, and I had to take a pregnancy test. And when I took the sample up to the male nurse, I don't know why they had male nurses in the women's prison, but anyway, they did. When I took the sample up to him, I said, if you give me a positive on this so that I can have milk 3 times a day, I promise you that if I give birth to a bastard, I will bring it right up to you and you can get Satan's DNA. He said he didn't think he could. But anyway, they all agreed, but several of them said, we're really going to miss your sense of humor. But not all the people are alike in prison. And the lady that took me around to these different stations to be sure that it was all okay, my daughter over there who was going to pick me up didn't arrive at the designated time, and so this lady guard had to keep me with her until I was turned loose. And so she talked to me a little bit, and she said her daughter was a young teenager, and she had said, I want to go to Africa someday. And she said, I said, well, maybe someday you'll be able to go. And shortly thereafter, her church was sending people to Africa for a week or two. And so her daughter said, could I go? And she said, I said, yeah, if your dad says so. And I didn't think he would. And so she asked her dad, and her dad said, sure, if you raise your own money. And she was the first one to have the money to go. And she said when her daughter got off the plane on the way back, she said, Mom, I'll never complain about anything in my life again. The first time I went there, we went out to help a woman with AIDS and her small children. And the second time we went out, I helped the children dig their mother's grave. And we have no idea what goes on in the rest of this world. But down at the School of the Americas, we are doing the one thing that I think is worse than hiring your own killer, and that's training your hired killer. There are more men from the country of Colombia in the School of the Americas than any other country. More than 50% of them are from Colombia. Colombia has the worst human rights record in this hemisphere, and I think there's only 2 countries that have worse human rights records. There are at least 11 dictators in South America that were trained at the SOA. So I urge you again to contact, not by a signature, but just a telephone call, a letter, your representative, until you find out how he intends to vote on closing the School of the Americas, because it happens in the House of Representatives, and then it will have to go to the Senate. And I am not able to get it closed by myself, so I'm asking you to work to do it for me. Thank you.